Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everything is going well with you. In this lecture, you will learn how you can summarize your data and perform different calculations on the summarized data. We will start by talking about grouping data using outline and subtotal features. After that, you will learn pivot table, which is one of the most useful tools in Excel that helps you summarize your data, perform calculation, and draw a chart using the summarized data. If you have a list of data that you want to group and summarize, Outline feature can help you to quickly display summary rows or columns. You can create an outline of rows as shown in this picture, an outline of columns, or an outline of both rows and columns. Outline feature is more useful for the worksheets with a lot of complex and detailed information that are difficult to read and analyze. When your dataset contains just one level of information and contains a formula, you can use Auto Outline, which is the fastest way to group your data. For this purpose, click the group arrow in the Outline group on the Data tab and select Auto Outline. As you can see here, the rows have been grouped based on different regions, and the outline bars have been added to the left of the first column. When your worksheet contains two or more levels of information, Auto Outline may not group your data correctly. In such a case, you can group rows manually. For this purpose, select the desired cells that you want to group, and on the Data tab, click the Group button, and in the Group dialog box, select Rows to group by rows, or select Columns to group by columns. When you group by row, a bar will be added on the left side of the selected cells. In a similar manner, you can create as many groups as necessary. If you need to create another group inside the main groups, you just need to select all detailed rows above the related summary row and click the Group button. For example, to create the Apple group within the East region, select rows 2 and 3 and click Group. Another way to create data group is using subtotal feature. This feature allows us to automatically create groups and use common functions like sum, count, and average to summarize our data. In this example, we want to use the subtotal feature to determine how many t-shirts were ordered in each size, such as small, medium, or large. As the first step, we should sort our data using the t-shirt size column. Then open Subtotal from the Data tab and select T-shirt size column from At Each Change in dropdown and count from the Use function to count the number of shirts in each size. As the last step from Add Subtotal to, we should select the column where you want the calculated subtotal to appear. In our example, we select T-shirt size. When you want to collapse the rows in a particular group, just click the minus button at the bottom of that group's bar. For example, here we collapsed East region group. In order to ungroup some of the rows, you should select those rows and click the Ungroup button. Then from the Ungroup dialog box, select Rows and click OK. In order to ungroup all the rows at once, go to the Data tab, click Ungroup, and then click Clear Outline. The demo in the next slide provides a summary of all the explained grouping features.
In this example, I have a list of t-shirt orders, but I really don't need to see the people's names and payment information right now. So with these three columns selected, I'm going to go to the Data tab and then click the Group command. Now we can show or hide this group using the button that's attached to this bracket here. Click the minus sign to hide or collapse the data, and the plus sign to show it again. To ungroup any data, make sure it's selected, then click the Ungroup command, and you're all set. The subtotal command is similar to groups. You can use it to create groups automatically and also add functions like sum, count, and average to help you summarize your data. In this example, I'd like to tally up the number of orders for each t-shirt size, including small, medium, large, and extra large. Before we can add a subtotal, our data has to be sorted by the column we plan to summarize, so I've already taken care of that here. As you can see, the t-shirts have been put into a custom sort order, going from smallest to largest. All we have to do now is click the subtotal command, and a dialog box will appear. Here we'll select the column that's going to be the basis for the subtotal. In this case, that's t-shirt size. Next, we'll pick the function that we're going to be using. Now there are several common functions to choose from, like sum, average, and product. But we're going to use count, which will just count the number of cells that contain each size. If you had numerical data, you could choose sum instead, and it would actually add the values from each of those cells to create a subtotal. Finally, check the column where you want the subtotal to appear, then click OK. Now, a couple of things have happened here. Each t-shirt size is now in its own group, indicated by the brackets here on the left, and all those groups are inside a larger group. This is also called an outline in Excel. The other thing that's happened is that each group has a subtotal beneath it. So we can see the number of shirts that have been ordered in each size, and at the very bottom, we can also see a grand total. To make the worksheet easier to read, we can show or hide the groups like we did before. But when you have groups inside of groups, like we do in this example, sometimes it's easier just to view them by level. Just look for the buttons to the left of your worksheet. The highest level, which is 3 in this case, will show all of your data. Level 2 will hide the details of each size, leaving just the individual subtotals. Finally, level 1 will hide everything, so we can only see the grand total. Let's click 3 to show the entire worksheet again. Okay, there's one more thing we'd like to point out. When you use subtotals, you'll notice these extra rows have been inserted in the spreadsheet. And while they're very useful for viewing our subtotal information, if you need to change the formatting or arrangement of your spreadsheet, you might find that these subtotal rows just get in the way. In a case like this, it's best to remove subtotals from your spreadsheet before you make any other big changes. To remove subtotals from your worksheet, all you have to do is click the subtotal command, then click the button that says Remove All. Grouping and subtotaling can make your worksheet less cluttered, more organized, and easier to view, so keep these features in mind the next time you need help summarizing your data.
Now we want to talk about pivot table. Pivot table is a fancy name for summarizing data. It's ideal for breaking down large data sets into the different categories and doing calculation on them. In pivot table, data can be dynamically arranged to view it from different angles. I'll use an example to explain pivot table for you. Look at this worksheet. As you can see here, we have the information of salespeople in different regions. Consider that we want to know the amount sold by each salesperson. Answering it could be time-consuming and difficult since each salesperson appears on multiple rows and we would need to total all of their different orders individually. We can use the subtotal feature to find the total for each salesperson, but pivot table enables us to play with our data easily and get more interesting results by combining the data of different columns. As the first step to create a pivot table, select the data range that you want to have in your pivot table. Then from the Insert tab, click Pivot Table. Create Pivot Table dialog box will appear. Check the cell range and choose if you want to have your pivot table on the current worksheet or if you want to create a new worksheet and put your pivot table on that worksheet. Once you create a pivot table, an editor will be displayed including an empty pivot table on the left side of the worksheet and the field list on the right side. A field section at the top of the field list is used to add or remove fields, and the bottom section is used to arrange the fields including for areas that are called filter, columns, rows, and values. The filter area allows you to easily apply filters to the pivot table report. Placing data fields into the filter area allows you to filter the entire pivot table based on your selections. The column area is composed of headings that stretch across the top of the columns in the pivot table. Placing a data field into the column area displays the unique values from that field in a column-oriented perspective. The row area is used to display the unique values from the field to the left side of the pivot table. The fields that we would drop in the row area include those that we want to group and categorize. They can be product names and locations. Finally, the values area calculates and count data. The data fields that you drag and drop in this area are typically those that you want to measure, such as sum of revenue, count of units, or average of costs. So it is important that you can decide which fields to add to each area of the pivot table based on the purpose of data analysis. As I said, in this example, we want to know the total amount sold by each salesperson. So we will take the salesperson and order amount fields. As you can see, the salesperson field has been added to the rows area, while order amount has been added to the values automatically. Alternatively, you can drag and drop fields directly into the desired area. As you can see, a table is created and summarizes the selected fields. In our example, the pivot table shows the amount sold by each salesperson. If you want to modify the column heading and number format or change the function that is used to show the grand total, go to the value section, click the field name, then click Field Settings to open Value Field Settings dialog. In order to modify the column heading, type the new name in the Custom Name box. For changing the default function, select the desired function from Summarize Value field by. And finally, to change the number format, click Number Format button. In order to add more columns to your pivot table, simply select the desired field and drag it to the desired area. In our example, we will use the month field and drag it into the column area to show the sale amount of each salesperson in different months. When you want to remove a field from your pivot table, drag the field out of its current area. You can also uncheck it in the field list. Sorting your pivot table data is same as the way that you sort the rows in a worksheet or a table. You just need to click the header of the row that you want to sort its data and click Sort A to Z for sorting from smallest to largest, or Sort Z to A for sorting from largest to smallest. Another way for sorting your data is using manual sorting feature. With the use of this feature, you can change the place of one of the rows without changing the sort of the other rows. For example, we can sort the rows ascending, then move one of the rows up or down. To do this, right-click on the row that you want to move, pointing to move, then use one of the options such as beginning, up, down, or end. There are three ways for filtering your data in pivot table. The first filtering option is like the regular filtering. You just need to click on the column header and specify the settings for the filter. The second way to filter your data is using a slicer feature. Slicer in pivot table is same as the slicer feature in table and shows an expanded graphical list. If you frequently need to filter your pivot table, you need to consider using a slicer instead of the regular filter. To add a slicer, just select any cell in the pivot table and from the Analyzer tab, click Insert Slicer. After adding the slicer, it will appear next to the pivot table. Just like filters, only selected items are used in the pivot table. When you select or deselect an item, the pivot table will instantly reflect the changes. The third way for filtering your data is using filters area. This type of filter is useful for aggregating data and when you don't want to show the field content in your pivot table. To apply this filter, we should drag and drop the desired field into the filters area. Here we will filter out certain salespeople to determine how their individual sales are impacting each region. One of the useful features that you can add to your pivot table is called calculated field. With the use of the calculated field, you can add a new field that doesn't exist in your original data and use this new field to show the calculation results of the other fields. For example, it can be used to show the summation of two other fields. In order to create a calculated field, click the pivot table and go to the Analyze tab, click Fields and Sets, then click Calculated Field. By clicking Calculated Field, Insert Calculated Field will display. In the name box, type a name for the calculated column, and in the formula box, enter the formula that you want to use for doing the calculation. Finally, click Add. Watch the demos in the next two slides to learn how to create calculated field in detail.
Two types of formulas in a pivot table are calculated field and calculated item. To create either of those, we would select a cell in the pivot table, go up to the Analyze tab, click Fields, Items, and Sets, and then we have a choice, calculated field or item. The calculated field lets us work with any of the fields in the pivot table, and the calculated items lets you work with any items in a specific field. So we'll try a calculated item first. And what we're going to do is work with this order status, and instead of having canceled plus 3 different types below it, we're going to combine all of these 3 into something called sold. Here I'll click calculated item, and the first thing we would do is give this a name, and I'm going to call it sold. And then we have to create our formula, and it right now just shows equals 0, and we can see all the fields in our pivot table here. And because I have order status selected, that's the one that it has highlighted in this list of fields, and it's showing all the items. But I could do something with any of the other fields if I prefer. If I wanted to work with the regions, I could click it and see its items. But we'll go back to order status, and what we want to do is get the total for back order plus pending plus shipped. And to do that, I'm going to double click on back order, and that puts it up into the formula. So I didn't have to delete what was there. It just deleted that for me and put back order in. Then I'll do a plus, and pending, I'll double click it, plus shipped. So we're going to get the total of those 3, and I'll click add and OK. Now what's happened is it still has canceled our other 3 items and sold. So we're getting double the amount for each of these items. So the last step here would be to hide the 3 items that are being included in sold. And now we just have canceled and sold. So that's a very simple calculated item. The other type of formula in a pivot table is a calculated field. So this is the same data. I've now listed all the sales reps here, how many total units they sold, and the total amount of their sales. We're going to give everyone a bonus, and it's going to be based on what total they sold. So I've got a cell selected in this pivot table. Go to Analyze, Fields, Items and Sets, and this time we've got a value field selected, so it's not offering to let us make a calculated item for that. So calculated field, and we're going to name this, and we'll call it bonus. And now we have fields, but there's no list of items. This time we're strictly working with the fields. We want to do something with this total, so I'll double click. It puts it in there, and for our bonus they're going to get 3% of their sales. So I'll do an asterisk to multiply, and 0.03 would be our multiplier. Click OK, and there's the bonus that each person will get based on 3% of their total sales.
I'm going to show you how to add a calculated field to your pivot table. So here we have a table that we'd like to create a pivot table on. So let's go through the normal steps. So we select inside the table, we select insert, we select pivot table, and now it's going to put it on a new sheet, and we'll say OK. And now I would like, first of all, to have the type of sale in my rows field. So I drag type down to rows. And I would like the date to be in my column field. And then I would like to count how many sales we had. So we're going to count by the account number. So here you have, you can see by the account number how many sales you had in each of these. But you know, this is good, except for we would like to add, instead of a counted field here, we'd like to add in the total of what they have spent in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to fields, and we're going to go to calculated fields. And then we're going to from this dialog box, we are going to select the amount. And then to get it to calculate, what we're going to do is we're going to put in a sum and then put brackets around the amount. And we could name the field, but we'll leave it at field 1, and we'll go OK. So it says sum of field 1, so you could change that on the thing to sum of account. But this is how you add. So you have a count of the number here, and now you have the sum of the number here. So this is a little more useful for what you need. So this is how you add a calculated field to your pivot table.
If you like to change the pivot table style, go to the Design tab and choose a style from the gallery. You can also select checkboxes in the Pivot Table Style Options group to customize the style as desired. For example, you can add banding to the columns or rows to add more contrast to the table data. In addition to using the Design tab for adding different styles to your pivot table, you can use the Layout group of the Design tab to add subtotals and grand totals to the pivot table. One important point about pivot table is that if you make changes to the underlying data in the pivot table, you must update the pivot table, since Excel doesn't automatically update pivot tables. To do this, click the pivot table and go to the Pivot Tables Analyzer tab and click Refresh. The last concept that I want to cover in this lecture is pivot chart. Pivot charts are like regular charts, except they display data from a pivot table. Just like regular charts, you will be able to select your desired chart type, layout, and style. For drawing a chart, we should click on Pivot Table Data and go to the Insert tab and click the pivot chart. After drawing a pivot chart, by changing the columns or rows in our pivot table, the chart will be updated automatically. The other difference between a regular chart and pivot chart is filtering feature that enables you to narrow down the data in your pivot chart. Watch the demos in the next 3 slides. They will provide 3 different examples related to pivot table and pivot charts.
In this example, I have some company sales data with columns for the salesperson, region, account, order amount, and month. And I need to find the answer to a very specific question. What is the amount sold by each salesperson? Because each salesperson has data on more than one row, I'd normally have to add these up in order to find the answer. But a pivot table can do this for us automatically, which will make the task much easier. First, you need to select your data. You can just click any cell if it's formatted as a table. Otherwise, you need to select all the cells yourself, and don't forget your column headers. When you're ready, go to the Insert tab, then click the Pivot Table command. You'll usually want to place your pivot table on a new worksheet, so make sure this option is selected. Then click OK, and a new sheet will appear. Over on the left is our blank pivot table. It's okay that there's nothing there yet. To the right is a list of fields that have actually been pulled from our column headers. This is where we control what is or isn't displayed in the pivot table. But before we continue, let's take another look at that question. What is the amount sold by each salesperson? This question tells us exactly which fields to use to find out the answer: salesperson and order amount. All you have to do is check the box next to the field, and it'll be added to one of the areas below, in this case the rows category. Another method is to drag and drop the field into place. We'll put this one under Values. If we go back to the pivot table, now we can see the information we were looking for. In other words, the amount sold by each salesperson. So our question has been answered just by choosing what fields to include. One of the best things about pivot tables is how easy they are to modify, so you can view and analyze different things. Let's say, for example, that you wanted to know each person's monthly sales, not just their total sales. Just drag the month field down here to columns, and this will add a column for each month in the worksheet. If we wanted to know what each region sold, we could take out the month and salesperson fields and then drag region down to rows. So each time we change the fields, the pivot table is just combining the source data in a different way, so we can view the information we need. And we're doing all this without adding or changing anything in the original worksheet. You can even experiment by dragging the fields into different areas, but some combinations work better than others. For instance, if I move order amount over to columns or rows, you can see that it doesn't really give us any useful data. Since order amount contains numerical values, it really does work best in the values area. Finally, if we click the arrow next to order amount and go to value field settings, we can change the function to something other than sum. Instead, we could count the number of cells, calculate the average, or use any of the other options here. Some of these functions will be more useful than others depending on your data, so that's just something to keep in mind. In our next video, doing more with pivot tables, we're going to talk about report filters. We'll also take a look at slicers and pivot charts, which can give you even more ways to work with your pivot table. This pivot table is showing us the regional sales totals for all the salespeople in our worksheet. However, I'd like to try removing certain people so we can see how their sales are impacting their regions. We can do this by adding a report filter, which can be used to narrow down the data in your pivot table. First, drag the salesperson field to the filters area. Then look to your pivot table and click the filter that's been added to the upper right corner. Next, check the option that says Select Multiple Items. Now we can check or uncheck the salespeople above, depending on who we want to include. I'm going to remove Michael Brennan, Richard Dumlau, and Shannon Thompson. When you're ready, click OK, and the filter will be applied. In this case, that means the totals have changed, and 2 of the regions have also been filtered out based on the people that we unchecked. If you like the way filters work, you might want to try adding a slicer next. Slicers make filtering even faster and easier by giving you access to the filters in their own separate pane. First, make sure you're on the Analyze tab, then click the Insert Slicer command. A dialog box will appear where you can check the filter you want. We'll use Salesperson like before. Now we can just click the salespeople we want to see without having to go to the filtering menu. You can even select multiple adjacent people by clicking and dragging your mouse. To select more than one non-adjacent item, hold Ctrl on your keyboard while you click. As you can see, the pivot table changes each time to reflect the data you've selected. The last thing I'd like to show you is a neat feature called pivot charts. Pivot charts are basically the same as regular charts, except they show whatever is in your pivot table. To get started, click any cell in your pivot table, then go to the Insert tab, and click the Pivot Chart command. A dialog box will appear where you can select the chart type you want, Then go ahead and click OK. Now any changes you make to the pivot table will show up in the pivot chart as well. For example, let's see what happens when we move these fields around a bit, so we can view each person's monthly sales data. With a pivot table, a pivot chart, and a slicer, we can look at the data in so many different ways, all without changing or deleting any of the original content. It's a great way to find whatever information you're looking for, or you can just experiment to see if you discover something new.
Here we have some employment data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, different types of jobs, whether they're private or government jobs, the number of jobs, and the change in jobs since the end of 2004. So we're going to start a lot like we're making a pivot table. You're going to select your data, but you're going to go to Insert, and under Charts, you'll see there's a Pivot Chart button, and this is only for PCs. Unfortunately, Excel for Mac does not support pivot charts. Click Pivot Chart, you'll see our table or range is selected. We want it in a new worksheet, click OK, and you're going to get a screen like this. Now click in your chart, and you're going to see all of your fields here, and below that you're going to have 4 sections for filters, legend, axis, and values. So first select the data that you want to analyze. Let's say we want to look at the change in employees. And then for your axis, that's going to be what shows up along your x-axis here. So we want to look at dates. Let's say we want to look at the change in employment over time. So here I can see the total change in non-farm payrolls by year since the end of 2004. But let's say I want to break it up, and I want my legend to show me whether they are goods or service positions. So here, if I drop goods or services into the legend, you can see you'll get a legend that says goods and service jobs. You can see your goods are in blue and your service jobs are in orange. Now let's say that I only want to look at private sector jobs. Now I can drop private or government in my filters, and then you'll see a little filter pop up in the left-hand corner of your chart. You can select here private, okay, and you'll see that there was a slight change because some of the service jobs were government jobs. And that is just a simple overview of using pivot charts to analyze a large data set.
We're done. That's all we had for this week's lecture. In the next lecture, we will talk about different analysis tools in Excel. Don't forget to ask your questions on the course forum or ask them from your tutor. See you guys. Bye.